Hi everyone, my name's Paul. Welcome to the Stormkeep. I'm here tonight with Mergank.
Hey guys, what's up?
Today we are doing a quick video here. It's not like our usual format. We just want to slide this video in, hopefully before the FAQ comes out, and we just want to talk about what to expect in the upcoming Stormcast FAQ. So Games Workshop used to consistently release an FAQ and errata 2 weeks after a Battletome release, and they've deviated from that lately. For reasons which we don't know, and frankly, it doesn't really matter. It's their problem. But the upcoming Stormcast FAQ determines a lot of what our value judgments are on a lot of our units, because there's some specific rule clarifications that could make a big difference in how we approach list building, how we approach using our units. How you use units, period, could totally change based on some of these rulings. So you can see here we've got a list of rule clarifications that we're looking at. So things like Translocation. We're looking at the core rules on how wound allocation and removing slain models works. We're looking at Cycle the Storm, the combination of Blaze of Glory, Only the Faithful, and Cycle the Storm. Things like the Toralon Comet Trail. Does it go away if you move away from the Toralon or not? Things like that. And we'll go through all of them later, but there's a few of them we want to focus more on in this video. And then there's some errors, like really simple stuff, missing keywords. The Lord Aquilor should probably have the Vanguard keyword. That seems like a mistake. Prosecutors should probably get bonus attacks on their grand weapons. It seems like a mistake. So we'll have a list of that stuff at the end there. So the first major contentious issue right now that I can see being discussed everywhere with Stormcast is that currently, as it's written, you can move in the movement phase after you set up a unit with Translocation in the hero phase. And I thought it would be interesting to go over the arguments for and against this mechanic. Starting with the arguments against it, it is inconsistent with how all other setup teleport abilities in the game work. They're typically, you have to set up more than 9 inches away from the unit, and then you can't move after doing that. Or it'll say it counts as a move, or some clause will be there that says you cannot make a normal move. And another argument is that perhaps Games Workshop made a mistake. This is not intentional behavior. They just left it out. It was an accident, and accidents happen. Another argument against it is that it is too powerful. Some people certainly have made the case that it is very powerful to translocate a unit of Stormdrake Guard and then move them in the hero phase and then charge them on a 2+, and just cover a lot of ground in that way. And the final argument that I see against Translocation is that it is far too consistent, because you can take a Lord Relictor who gets +1, making it a 2+ to activate, and then he can also take a trait to re-roll that. And it's a combination of these things, I think, is the argument against moving again after Translocation. If it was this ability activated on a 5+ and you couldn't re-roll it, maybe people wouldn't have an issue with it necessarily, because it's a very strong effect, but it's also 1 in 3 chance of going off. So maybe the consistency of it is the problem, maybe not the effect. And the arguments we have in favor of moving after Translocation, first ones are a few generic arguments, is that an ability being unique doesn't mean it's wrong. Lots of units in the rules have something that just completely breaks the functionality of the game, right? Something that is so specifically worded that you have to pore over the details and minutiae of the rules in order for it to make sense. But it does work, and that just because something is complex and specific doesn't mean it's an error. It doesn't mean that it's a mistake that the writers made it work this way. If anything, if something is very specific and works as it's written, to me that's an indication that they went out of their way to make sure it works, and they were very careful with how they worded it. Another argument in favor of moving after Translocation is that just because an ability is strong doesn't mean it's an error. Lots of rules are very strong in this game. It's very strong that Lumineth Sentinels can shoot without line of sight 30 inches away, doing mortal wounds on a 5.
Or foxes.
It's very strong.
Move.
It's very strong that Lumineth Foxes can move in your shooting phase. Even if you charge them in the hero phase, they can still retreat out of that. That's a very strong ability. Does that mean it's an error? No. It is just a strong ability. It's powerful, and it's okay for things to be powerful, right? Your models should feel cool. They should do a cool thing. You shouldn't just have a spreadsheet. And ironic, because I just did a whole video about spreadsheets, but you shouldn't just have spreadsheets tackling each other in the middle of the field, right? The game should be about cool abilities that break the mold.
Those are, and I think that's why we write rules, right? Because that's how power is expressed in the game. That's one of the basic ways that power is expressed. That there are certain models that either bend the rules or break them entirely, and that's a cool thing to do, and that's how you make the model powerful.
Yeah, and that's the reason rules exist in the first place, is so that you can have a cool moment when they break later. That's the classic setup payoff, and every movie structure is done this way, kind of getting a bit out of the wheelhouse of tabletop gaming here, but that's just a common theme. It's fun to break the rules. That's why we make rules, because it's fun to break them. So in particular, those are general arguments for any kind of ability that going forward might have this kind of issue. A major one, I always had a problem explaining this to people, was how Aether Wings worked in 2nd edition. And it seemed that it took about a year for people to understand, yes, this is actually how they work. It's not a charge move. It's actually, this is what it does, and you got to play around it, right? You got to accept that this is how it is. This is intentional, and no two ways about it. In particular, this wording of translocation was printed in the 3.0 FAQ, which was it was meant to tide people over until their full battle tome was released. It updated some abilities, it updated some enhancements, and one of the things that happened was that this exact version of translocation was copied and pasted into that FAQ. So,
yep, it has survived, I think, 3 FAQs since July. So we've had this version of translocations for about 3 months now. So
yeah, so a lot of people just, again, they thought this must be a mistake because it's not consistent with the other things, and the battle tome will fix it, right? That's what everybody thought. And I personally thought that as well. I wasn't playing with moving after translocating because I thought, oh, it's just an FAQ, they'll fix it in the battle tome. But now that the battle tome is out, and it's the exact same wording, you have to think, oh, maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe they actually want you to play this way. And looking at the new battle tome, it certainly feels that way, because they have drastically reduced Stormcast mobility, right? The Heraldor can't do run and charge anymore. The only way to run and charge is if you take an enhancement specifically for it, and it costs you a command
point. And that's once per game.
And it's once per game, and it has to be issued by a knight or a lord, unlike other commands, and you can't run 6 at the same time. So there's all these restrictions built onto an ability that we just used to have for 100 points all the time. And we also lost Gavriel, giving his +3 charge command. We lost the ability to stack that going into 3rd edition, and then he just doesn't have that ability anymore at all.
So definitely.
Stormcast have taken a beating in terms of mobility, and if you were to remove translocation, you would kill a lot of strategies, because 4-inch move units are not fast enough to do anything.
If the last 3 years have taught us anything, 9-inch charges are not good, guys. Like, there's a reason. Okay, the only time I've seen any other faction doing 9-inch charges was Ironjaws. And Ironjaws used to do that because they could get with a particular subfaction like a +2 or +3 to charge. 9-inch charges is just, if that's your strategy going forward for Stormcast, they are not a mobile army. You're never going to make those.
No, and maybe it's not a bad thing if Stormcast are an immobile army, but it seems like the whole book was designed with the fact that you could translocate 1 unit per turn, because there's nothing else in there. The rest of the army is just walking normally and charging normally. There's no bonuses to charge anywhere. There's no run in charge. There's very limited sources of retreat and charge. It's a slow army.
And the thing is, it's based on a prayer that you cannot spam. Knight Heralders, you could take 3 of those in the old edition and pair them up with like 10 evocators each, have them all run and charge, and it was automatic. It wasn't even a command point. Gabriel Sherrard had a wholly within 12-inch bubble for every unit within that bubble. So you took it in like Skyborn Slayers and had 5 units on a +3 to charge. This is, no matter what, you cannot spam this prayer. It is 1 unit, a turn. And if you fail that prayer, you fail it. Which can happen. You might not choose the reroll prayers command trait, so it could happen.
Yeah, no, I'm not totally convinced that it is a balance issue. And I think if it is something that, the Stormcast armies are too consistently using translocation, I think they could go other routes. I really like this functionality of being able to move after teleporting, and I think there's other ways to tone it down. For example, you could increase the cost of the Lord Relictor drastically if needed. You could make him 200 points, and that would just be a general nerf to any strategy relying on this without breaking the functionality. In addition, it's worth mentioning that after playing some games with it, we've noticed some key workarounds that your opponents can do. If they're paying attention, when you move in the movement phase after teleporting, your opponents can redeploy in response, right? So if you try teleporting up a unit of protectors, let's say, who have a 4-inch move, you move up 4 inches and they redeploy back D6, which is about 3 to 4 inches back. which cancels out the teleport. So the strong ability that you're relying on to have a somewhat decent charge is suddenly just negated by one command point that you can't stop. So it has opportunities to play around it. So I don't think even now in its current state it's necessarily a problem. But what I'm most worried about is that if they do change this ability, it will just gut the book. There will be a lot less creativity in list building. You will pretty much only see 2 different lists with Stormcast. It'll be spamming Drakes because they're fast, and castle
spamming
formations.
Annihilators with the Lord Imperatives.
Yep, Deep Strike Annihilators. Yep. And just castle formations of, I'm going to shoot you off the table unless you can kill me in 3 turns. You know, like it's going to get really boring. A lot of creativity is going to get sucked out of it if Translocation is changed. And that's a result of them gutting the mobility in the book, right? Like if Heraldor still had his run and charge ability, I don't think we'd need this Translocation thing. But they went out of their way to cut down all the mobility in the book. So I think that there's an argument that maybe this one ability that allows us to have decent mobility can stay. Saying ability and mobility a lot, it's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah, well, the other, I want to really address, like, because there's a reason people think that Translocation is too strong. Like moving a unit after teleporting is too powerful. So let me just remind you of the other mobility options in the game. As we already mentioned, we have things like Lumineth Foxes that can move up to 36 inches, I think, in a turn, or 24 inches. We have Iron Jaws, who essentially, with a Maw Crusher issuing Mighty Destroyer to 3 different units, means that a Maw Crusher and 2 different units of Gore Gruntas, which are battle line in their army, will move collectively 24 inches and 18 inches each turn. Each turn. That's pretty much guaranteed. Not to mention, if Iron Jaws decides to take the Great Hand of Gork spell, the one that lets them teleport 9 inches away, they can choose to drop 12.1 inches away from your army and still use Mighty Destroyers to make a normal move towards your army, and then charge you.
Yeah.
So
mobility is not rare in this game, and maybe there is the argument that because Stormcast have really heavy hitting weapons and really heavy armor, they shouldn't have any mobility at all. And I can't see that argument, because aside from Translocation, we pretty much don't have any mobility. It's just Drakes and Translocation. That's it. That's all we got.
Yep. We have no delivery mechanism, and it's like there have been certain arguments that Stormcast should not have any special rules. That they're essentially just Space Marines, so they should just be about pound for pound the best armored and best hitting guys possible. But that doesn't work in a game that is like now saturated with lots of -1, -2 rend and more wounds. I think you need reliable delivery mechanisms for your big armored dudes to be able to hit things where they have to hit them, because otherwise you're wasting points on extremely elite units who are gonna, and your army is just gonna drop a lot in efficiency as you start losing models, which is, this is the game we're designed to kill things, so it'll happen.
Yep. Well, I don't want to beat this into the ground. I feel like we've presented the arguments. If you feel like there's a really strong argument against Translocation that we haven't covered, please mention it. I feel like I don't want to be unfair, right? I don't want to consider somebody's viewpoint as invalid just because I don't necessarily agree with it. If you see something that I don't, please just let us know. We're not unreasonable people. We're willing to talk this through. Maybe there's something we're totally missing. But from our biased perspective as Stormcast players, and we do play other armies as well, but we do play Stormcast, and for me, it's a fun thing. I want this ability to be fun and powerful. Balance is a different issue. You can solve that by changing points. You can solve that by getting rid of the High Priest command trait to make it less reliable. There's other ways to solve the balance aspect of it. I love this functionality, and I hope it stays.
Mm-hmm. And it's thematic. I mean, this is what Stormcast do in the lore. They make surgical strikes. They come out of the clouds in lightning formations, and they make surgical strikes with low number of model units. So I don't really see it as opposing the fluff either.
Yeah. Now the only change I would make is I'd rename it from Translocation back to Lightning Chariot like it was in first edition, because that name was way cooler, and it's actually a lot more fitting with what the ability does now. It feels like you're using a Lightning Chariot to charge in. So that's the only change I'd make personally. All right, the second, I view this as the second big thing that the Stormcast FAQ has to cover, and it has nothing necessarily to do with Stormcast, but the discussion on Cycle of the Storm has brought up what seems to be a paradox within the core rules, and it would require clarification or an errata. So I've listed here the relevant sections 14.1, 14.2, and 1.3. And regardless of how Cycle of the Storm actually works, this is a standalone issue. This is not related to Cycle of the Storm. You could get rid of Cycle of the Storm completely from the game, just errata it from every war scroll, and this issue would still be present. This is an independent problem.
Mm-hmm.
So what exactly is the problem? As per section 14.1, you allocate wounds one at a time to a model until that model is slain. As per 14.2, it says a slain model cannot have any more wounds allocated to it. Once it's slain, that's it. No more wounds. 14.2 also says that slain models are removed after all wounds have been allocated. So there is a clear allocation stage and then a removal stage when it comes to this. And then it also says that a destroyed unit has all remaining wounds negated. And then finally, a destroyed unit is defined as one that has all of its models removed. So if you are to take 14.1 to mean that the only way to negate damage is if the unit is destroyed, then there's an infinite loop and the game can't proceed. It's like you have a blue screen on a Windows PC. So let me give you an example of where this would happen. So let's say you have a model with 5 wounds and it takes 6 damage from an attack. You allocate the wounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Model's now slain. What happens to wound number 6? The wound can't be allocated to that model because all the models in that unit are slain, right? That's consistent with 14.2. The wound can't be negated because the unit's not destroyed yet. The unit's not destroyed because the models aren't removed. And the model can't be removed because the wounds aren't allocated. And you can't allocate the wound because the models aren't slain. And the wound's not negated because the unit's not destroyed. It's an infinite loop. It just keeps going back in logic and you can't resolve it. So currently, as the rules are written, it seems to be the case that as soon as you deal any amount of overkill damage at all, the game freezes. However, this is not actually what 14.1 says. All that it does is govern how wounds be allocated to a destroyed unit. Let's take a look at that clearly. That last sentence in 14.1, it says, if a unit is destroyed, all wounds that remain to be allocated to the unit are negated and have no effect. Nowhere does it say that is the only way to negate wounds. It's a little... like I don't like being this pedantic, but you kind of have to be when it comes to these rules, right? If a rule says a clear, all covering section like wounds are allocated one at a time, okay, there's no arguing with that, right? But in this case, it's not an all-encompassing rule. It specifically just says if a unit is destroyed, all wounds that remain to be allocated are negated. It doesn't govern what happens before a unit is destroyed or after a unit is destroyed. It's just talking about the situation where units are destroyed. Yeah. So technically, it doesn't explicitly state that overkill wounds are not negated when all models are slain. We can infer that's the case because, as we described, the game just freezes unless you make that assumption. So what are the possible solutions here? Well, the minimum thing they could do is add a clarification that overkill damage is also negated before removing models. They've done clarifications like this in the past when the rules have been unclear. They've come out and said, no, this is actually how it works. We're going to add a little bit more context for the sake of the rules. We're not going to change how the rules work. We're just telling you this is actually how it works. You may have had to infer some things from it. Another possible solution is to change the definition of a destroyed unit to mean all models in the unit are slain rather than all models in the unit are removed. Because then in that case, it wouldn't create the logical loop anymore. Because the unit is destroyed, you can now negate wounds and move on to removing models. There's no problem if you do that. Yep. Alternatively, they could also just completely nuke this whole section of the rules and go back to how wounds were resolved in 2nd edition. I personally don't think that's going to be very likely because they put a lot of time, it seems, into changing the way the rules work from 2nd to 3rd edition. Why would you do that unless you had a specific reason to do it? It's not something you accidentally do one day. Oh, I'm just going to make the rules more esoteric and confusing. Why would you do that? Right. Yeah. So this is an issue that needs to be resolved, not necessarily related to Stormcast and not necessarily related to Cycle of the Storm. Speaking of which, Cycle of the Storm is a contentious issue. After our 3rd video, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and the argument I propose, I still stand by. As the rules are written, you can revive a model even if the unit takes infinite overkill damage and is wiped out. So, assuming they resolve the paradox in the core rules, Cycle of the Storm would function this way. The arguments against Cycle reviving against all overkill is that it is inconsistent with how the ability worked in 2nd edition. Again, you could say that Games Workshop made a mistake. They didn't intend for this kind of behavior because it's powerful, arguably too powerful, especially if you stack it. It could end up being massively powerful because you have a bunch of ways to stop Krondys or Karazai from being slain. 2 or 3 times per turn. You have to kill them with 4 different packets of damage. and it's quite complicated. It's not intuitive how this exactly works. Even in the video that I made about it, and I feel like I have a good understanding of it, I kind of stumbled through it because it is fairly complicated. It's not intuitive how you go about doing this, especially once you result in multiple wounded models in a unit. It gets confusing.
Just out of curiosity, in second edition, were wounds allocation and model removal happening like in an alternate manner? Like were they happening like one at a time?
How it worked before is that slain and removed were basically the same thing. As soon as a model took enough wounds to die, you would remove it immediately. Now there's a
so it wasn't like I allocate, like if I take like 4 damage, I allocate 2 to this, 2 to this. Once I've done my allocation, I remove them both at the same time. It was I take 2, I remove that model, then I take 2, I remove that model.
Yes,
like that.
That's how it worked in second edition. And how it works now is you take 4 damage to the unit, you apply 2 to one model, you apply 2 to another model, you discard any other wounds, and then you have to discard any wounds, otherwise the game freezes, and then you remove the models one at a time. So that's that small difference in timing. It creates the opportunity for an ability like Blaze of Glory to function alongside abilities like Only the Faithful and Cycle of the Storm. So it seems intentional to me that they went through and did all this work just to get these abilities to function properly, because it would make sense if they designed the third edition rules with the first wave of battle tomes in mind. So going back to it, so arguments against Cycle here. In the absence of an official statement, what you should be doing is looking at the second edition FAQ, because they did clarify how Cycle the Storm works in the second edition of Battle Tome and the second edition rules. Personally, I don't buy that argument, because I don't think you should ever use an FAQ from a previous edition of a book or a previous edition of a game, period. Because if you were to do that, what's stopping you from using the first edition FAQ for anything? Just because it seems to line up with what you want. That doesn't track for me. I'm not sure why people make that argument. It is consistent with how the third edition rules are worded. How Cycle currently works is totally consistent with the rules. It doesn't break anything. The paradox that I mentioned before is irrelevant to Cycle the Storm. Cycle the Storm happens after wounds are allocated, when models are being removed, so it's past that messy part. When you remove the models, you choose not to remove one of them, and then it gets healed for a wound. It's very simple how it actually works. The Cycle ability itself is quite simple. The implications of it are complicated, but the ability itself is quite simple. And again, an ability being strong or unique is not an error. Just because something is powerful or something has a specific way of working with the rules that nothing else has a way doesn't mean that the developers made a mistake. Finally, I don't think it's necessarily imbalanced. I thought maybe at first it could be. After playing a few games with it, I'm not convinced it is, because Lord Arcanums are all overpriced. They only cast 1 spell, except for Aventus, who's 300 points. He casts 2 spells, but they're all +0 to cast. So any other army,
they're not special wizards, and their special abilities, they're not like extremely fighty. I think most of them on average probably do like 2 to 4 damage to like a 3-up save. And then their special abilities don't really account for why they're costed so high.
Yeah, like why would a Lord Arcanum, just the standard foot one, he's a 155-point wizard. He does have 6 wounds and a 3-up save, but that still doesn't explain 155 points. He has +0 to cast. He casts 1 spell. His melee attacks are fine, right? It doesn't explain his point cost, right? So it kind of seems like Cycle works this way, and it's a strong ability, and they costed our units accordingly. I don't see any other way to justify the 285 point cost on a Toralon, for example. If Cycle the Storm isn't worth 30 to 50 points, that model doesn't make any sense to me. Finally, even if you have multiple Arcanums, you can still play around it. You can kill the Arcanums. There is a specific range that models have to be wholly within it. 18 inches is quite large, but it's not the entire table. I'd say 18 is at the point where if you make a charge, you can still get pulled out of it if you're out of position. If you are in range to be healed by Cycle, you're probably in range to get hit by something else, especially in terms of shooting. There's also the fact that you can just do another packet of damage and the model dies. It's not like you have an invulnerability for the whole turn. It's a what would be a good one here? It's like you
just have to invest multiple resources. Like you could maybe instead of just like trying to finish it off with 1 model, you'll have to use 2 models to kill something.
Yeah.
Now I could see multiple Lord Arcanums having like, not that it's overpowered, but creating like a negative play experience. Like in that sense, if you want to FAQ it to be like each unit can only be affected by this ability once per turn.
Yeah, that's an easy fix.
I'll be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it really becomes a problem, alternatively, you could just raise the cost of Arcane Lord Arcanums. That is another solution, right? If you make them 250 points, you're paying a lot of points for an ability that's not necessarily going to save you, right? Somebody can just walk up with a one attack weapon and just kill you. It's if you guys have ever played Hearthstone, it's the reborn mechanic. That's all it is, right? You're left with one health remaining, and your opponent could just walk over and do one damage. It's a good mechanic. It's strong, but it's not invulnerability. Like it's not that strong. Okay, so that covers the major rule things that we'd like to see covered, and we're up to about 25 minutes on what it should have been a short video. I think we never had a proper discussion about translocation until now, so that's fine. We got it out of the way. And so let's take a look at some potentially hilarious mistakes in the battle tome. How many of these are intentional or mistakes? We could play a little game here. Let's start with the Taurolon is the only mount that can't take a mount trait. It's a weird thing. It seems a little mean that they didn't include him on the list. If it's intentional, it's weird. The Lord Aquilor buffs Vanguard units, the keyword, but he doesn't have that keyword himself, so he can't use his ability on himself, despite certainly being a Vanguard
the leader of the Vanguard chamber.
Yeah, I think the leader of the Vanguard would have Vanguard. He also doesn't have the Griff Charger keyword, despite riding a Griff Charger and having it listed in his War Scroll. So he cannot take a mount trait either, which is odd. Vanguard Raptors don't have the Vanguard keyword. So really, right now, the only person the Lord Aquilor is buffing is Vanguard Hunters and Vanguard Paladors. The Celestant Prime and Indrasta are neither Knights, nor Lords, nor Draconith, so they cannot activate most of the holy commands. That doesn't seem right. It doesn't make sense that Indrasta and Celestant Prime can't activate these abilities, but a Storm Drake Guard can. Still trying to figure that one out.
Yeah.
The Stormstrike Chariot is probably missing the Angelos keyword. It is an Angelos unit, and it does have a potential shooting attack, so it could benefit from Thunderbolt Volley. Maybe they excluded the keyword to protect people from making that mistake of using Holy Command on a chariot.
Or attacks on Thunderbolt Volley.
Yeah,
sure.
That's it. We figured it out. Other things that could potentially be issues, the Fulminators, despite having the exact same glaive that a Protector has, they only attack 1 inch with it instead of 3 inches. That just seems wrong. It's a model issue, not a rules issue. It seems like they should have a longer range. Evocator Grand Stabs were mysteriously reduced from 2 inch to 1 inch, which has a big impact on their viability, and their points certainly don't reflect it. Feels like Grand Stabs
they in fact went up because I remember Evocators being at 210, and Evocators in pretty much every sense of the word got weaker, but somehow went up 20 points.
Yep.
But doesn't explain it.
Yep. It could have been part of the general make everything cost more approach, but Evocators didn't get any better. In fact, they got worse in a lot of ways. They lost a lot of what used to make them good. And they still do a bunch of mortal wounds, and the problem is they just don't reinforce well at all. And that's because Grand Stabs are winning. So I don't know if that's an error. I don't know if it's intentional, but I would like to see that fixed. I would like to use my block of 10 Evocators again. Neither of the Prosecutor Primes, both the Javelin and the Hammers, they don't get bonus weapons if they take the Grand Weapon or the Trident, which is weird. Every other Prime gets a bonus attack, except, I guess, the Vanguard Raptors. It's just weird that the Prosecutors don't. They get it with every other weapon, just not the special weapon, which greatly devalues them.
Yeah, I'd like to know why on that, because they went out of their way to have this, like, do this on 2 separate War Scrolls, both the Hammer and the Javelin Prosecutors.
Yep.
And it's just bizarre. It's like, did they think it'd be too overpowered to have like a flying unit with a Grand Hammer extra attack, like an extra 2 damage? That'd be way too powerful or something. Like, it's bizarre.
Why even have it as an option at that point?
Yeah.
Right? Just Drakesworn Templars have a 4-up save. I know that Maw Crushes also got reduced from a 3-up to a 4-up, but they have the option to still be a 3-up, and it seems like they just forgot to put that in with the Drakesworn Templar for some reason. He's just the worst save in the entire book for his size and the type of model. It really didn't make any sense for me to see him reduced to a 4+ save, so I'm wondering if it was a mistake. If it is intentional, his points certainly don't reflect it. I don't know why anybody would pay 400 points for that, since it only has a 4-up save. And finally,
for some reason, foot heroes are just way stronger than him.
Like a Knight Incantor takes damage better than a Drakesworn Templar does. He takes it at a reduced rate, which is weird, really weird.
It is.
Finally, I don't think they're going to change this in the FAQ, but the Anvils of the Heldenhammer ability is really bad. It's really bad. It's not fun. It slows the game down. It sucks. It's just so bad that, just errata it. Just change it to something else.
Make it -1 bravery when you're near. Like turn it into like that, that really bad command trait we used to have near our general, which is like -1 bravery when you're within 6 or something.
Well, I was thinking a cool ability would be at the start of the combat phase, pick one enemy unit. It has -1 to hit that phase. You don't have to keep track of it. It's nice and simple. There's no weird bravery check. It's still thematically appropriate because you're spooking them with the anvils, right? So that's a nice, easy change, right? And that's actually a good ability. I might take that instead of another Stormhost, because if I don't care about battle line, maybe that ability is better than another one. So yeah, that's what we're expecting in the FAQ. If you feel like we missed anything obvious, please feel free to point it out to us. We love answering comments, and we're very active on our Discord server. So the last thing we wanted to talk about today in our short 31-minute video is our upcoming podcast, what you guys can expect, and our upcoming community events. Murgank, you want to take it away?
Sure, yeah. So next week, you'll have Stormcast Allies, or the podcast about Stormcast Allies, to look forward to. We're expecting the FAQ to drop in the next 2 weeks, hopefully like maybe tomorrow, hopefully this Monday, or at least the next Friday. So once that's out, we'll quickly do a video on first probably reacting to it, and then an analysis of it. And then based on that FAQ, because based on how Translocation and Cycle didn't go, it'll change a lot of how we evaluated Stormcast units in our first video. So for instance, Paladins, we rated them pretty high except for Decimators, but without Translocation, maybe they're not as good or as much of an auto take as they were before. So look forward to that. Secondly, we want to talk about painting and hobby nights. So we have a link to our Discord down in the description, and one of our co-hosts, JJ, is actually going to be doing painting and hobby nights on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on Saturdays from 7 to 10 a.m. and then 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yeah,
and if you'd like to
make
join,
sure that we could include everybody from Europe and Australia, and I guess maybe there's some people in China too. I've seen in our analytics we have a couple people in China listening to us, so shout out to you guys.
So yeah, and if that's something you're interested in, if you just like to hang and talk about Stormcast and discuss some other painting strategies, you're more than welcome to join.
Yep. Eventually, people have requested that we do battle reports. We are not currently set up to do that. Frankly, I don't even know how we would do that, because I don't know where Murgank lives, so that would be a difficult one. But JJ and I live pretty close to each other, and we can get some battle reports going. I do own multiple armies, so we don't necessarily have to do gladiatorium battles of Stormcast versus Stormcast. We do want to get battle reports going. We're just not set up for it right now. We're working on it. So if you request it, please note we are working on it, and we will get to it. And I'm actually excited about that, because I like playing the game more than I like talking about it.
Definitely.
Yeah. And finally, I just wanted to thank you guys for all the support we get. It has been really great. I'm really loving this. I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and hearing all the good feedback kind of just makes me want to do more and more of it. So thank you for all that. We're really, really appreciative for all that.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.